Yeah, I really better not blow it now, huh? Joy, can I have a wand, or did you have to keep it?
I don't mind.
I don't have one.
You mean different wands will all work? That's amazing. While they're working that out, would you guys mind if we went back to prayer for a minute? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all the people who participated to make this event possible. We thank you for the speakers, we thank you for the organizers, and for all the people who chose to give a Saturday to come and be with us as we celebrate, defend, and build this culture of life through science, through technology, through conversation, through sharing of information, and sharing each other. Please bless our efforts. May we all, through our mutual sharing, fertilize and bring forth great fruit for the next generation of pro-life work. For the glory of the kingdom of God. Amen. When we first got started this morning, I was so excited during Dr. Kunig's talk. I went, oh, he made that comment that will tie so naturally to what I want to talk about. And then we went on, and oh, another speaker had something to say that was just along the lines. So at first I was writing down each of the speakers and the things that they said that sort of coalesced with what I was going to say. And then I realized every single speaker had something worth tying back to, so I'm not going to bother trying to do it. It might happen throughout organically, and I bet you are going to see the connections. But it's not just because they all happen to be on the same theme of sort of kind of related to pro-life. It's something special about this year that I genuinely believe God has inspired and drawn us together to offer something unique that will lead to fruit, that will lead to a great outpouring of grace and development in our pro-life work, especially right here in the Dayton area as well as in Cincinnati and way up north in Sydney where I come from. So thank you for praying with me, and thank you for listening to just one more presentation as we move forward. My theme for this talk is the key to life in a modernized society. Let's see if I can get, which button do I have to press?
The one to the right of the circle. No. See the green circle?
Oh, okay.
There you go.
The key to life in a modernized society. Now, I'm not in a debate right now. I know Dr. Lee likes to go to different colleges and enter into debates, and that's fantastic work, but I like the benefit of just giving a presentation, because in a presentation, I get to define all my terms, and nobody gets to challenge them. So you're stuck with whatever terms I choose to use. For the term key, obviously this can mean a few different things. When you're talking about a pyramid structure, key means one thing. When you're talking about completing a work of art or a church, a key means another thing. For me, key is pretty simple. That which unlocks the desired effect. And the desired effect is life. And again, I'm going to use a term that Danis correctly identified as not easy to define. I like to think of it as the same way we might think of the Trinity or the church. It's not easy to define. In fact, it needs more than a definition. It needs a whole theology to understand this term. But when I say life, I mean a culture of life. And when I say culture of life, I mean a culture that defends, supports, and celebrates the dignity of life and the sanctity of all human persons. And so I love what Michael Rose had to share in his presentation to draw in how literature even is an important part of building up and celebrating the culture of life. I'd love to see a presentation on how holidays enable us to celebrate the culture of life. So we want to unlock this key. We have a door blocking us in our society today that we want to unlock and move forward to bring forth a culture of life. And it doesn't mean that once we have it, it's going to have this mainstay that is impenetrable, but it means that as we build it a little bit at a time, we open that door a little bit wider, we can see more clearly the ways that life is protected and defended and sanctified and celebrated. So we want to open that door, and we want to continue to open it wider and wider and wider. And I don't think we're ever going to be done opening that door. But our third term, life in a modernized society. Now, when I use the term here, modernized society, this is a science and technology conference. Now, I have a degree in theology and a degree in philosophy, so I'm not exactly qualified to talk about science and technology. Last year, I went into social media, and that was kind of my loose connection. This year, I'm going to go into the social sciences a little bit And so that's kind of my stretch into science and technology. But when I say modernized society here, I don't mean modernism per se. I mean a modernized society in which there are certain comforts, certain freedoms. Of course, the ancient Egyptians thought of themselves as a modernized society. Certainly the Romans thought of themselves as a modernized society, and the French revolutionists and the Renaissance. But when I say modernized society in this sphere, I mean a society of scientific and technological advancements that enable a high level of freedom. And the freedoms I want to focus on, the freedoms that we have here in this country: freedom of information, freedom of comfort, freedom of communication, and freedom of choice. Go ahead with that. Ooh, choice. Yes, freedom of information. I remember when my parents first got the Encyclopedia Britannica. The door salesman came and he opened up his, so we had all the information in the world right there. And that's part of the era of information. It's amazing how many people go to grade school, much less high school and college, in our modernized society. Throw on top of that comfort. I don't like pain. I also really like pleasure. I'm addicted to sweets, I have to confess, and it's been a struggle that I've gone with through years, and some days I've had great success, and other times in my life, finding that when I have kids, it's harder to shake off that comfort. But comforts, removing pain, and enjoying pleasure are so bountiful in our modernized society that we can pretty much have them whatever we want, however we want, whenever we want, regardless of whether or not we have money to pay for it. So we have an unbelievable level of freedom with comfort. Modern freedom of communication. Everyone has the opportunity today to express themselves. And this was true 30, 40 years ago, but it's even more true today with our social media. Everyone gets to be an author and a speaker and a publisher. We have such a level of communication, and there's such a birth of information out there that it really plays a major role in what it means to strive to open that door to life today. And lastly, choice. Perhaps there's never been a culture in the history of the world that has more freedom of choice than we do. And I'm going to hijack the term. We have a tyranny of choice. We have such an emphasis on the importance of choice and the ability of choice. And it's so filled into our culture today and into our generation, in my generation, we'll get to that a little more, that we're suffering from what the abundance of choices is, that we have trouble making a choice and then accepting the fact that that means we don't have the other choices anymore. And this choice thing really took off, especially in 1973. And because of that, now 40 years later, we're in a special time. We are, I myself, and those surprisingly large amount of young people around me, we are the chosen generation. And what I mean by that is not that we're chosen to save the world. What I mean by that is that we got the opportunity to be chosen by our parents. We got the opportunity to be chosen by the generation that came before us. I was born in 1983. If you do the math, that means I'm 30. That means those people who are 10 years younger than me and 10 years older than me to newborns today are all part of a group of people that did not have to be chosen. Our parents had every legal right to just let us die in our mother's wombs. And as every year has moved forward into history, they have had more and more of a cultural right to let us die in our mother's wombs. So because of that, not only have our numbers significantly shrunk, not only are we the survivors of the homicide, but we've become something special. We become unique. I saw this movie, wonderful movie, another science fiction movie, called The Children of Men, in an era not far from now, when people lose the ability to have children. And people have not seen a baby in 20 years. And then a baby's born for the first time. And the way that people ooh and awe over that child, the sanctity, the holiness that that little fragile life has. Wouldn't you want to just pour that life full of treasures? And that's, believe it or not, that's what many of us in this generation today, the chosen generation, have experienced. Because we could only live if we were chosen, we were special. There were fewer of us across the country, across the world, and there were fewer of us per family. So our parents have doted on us. Our parents have spoiled us. Now I know this is not a universal. There are plenty of great families that have not spoiled their children, and there are certainly a lot of broken families that didn't have the opportunity to spoil their children. But I'm not speaking here just from my own theory, from my own idea of maybe it happened like this. Again, this is about sociology, this is about social science. I explored and I came across a great text, and in fact, this is the figurehead that I'm going to use to express a whole body of work. Dr. Jean Twenge is a sociologist who studied generations and their transformation over time. In her own doctoral work, she noticed that there was this male to female characteristic test, and back in 1970, women who took this test got a 5% on certain masculine traits. Today, many of these women are getting 70 or 80% on these masculine traits, because obviously society's changed, and the way we identify ourselves has changed. And she noticed that, and she said, there's got to be something to this. So she really dug down, and she found some great statistical research. It's not enough, by the way, to just pull up Mr. Coudron here and ask him how he thought as an 18-year-old, and then ask one of our 18-year-olds what they think. Because maybe, just maybe, Mr. Coudron's memory is a little to his favor, we'll say. But what she was able to do is she was able to study high school evaluations, college evaluations, taken over decades. And so she got a real clear idea of how people thought at the pivotal age of their young adulthood. And that young adulthood was what they were becoming, and it was the fruit of what the generation before them had helped to make them. And so we've noticed that certain things have transformed. These are trends that are growing specifically in high school educated and college educated. So the cream of the cream, if you will, of the chosen generation. We have higher self-esteem, higher self-confidence, higher self-focus, and higher self-reliance than generations before us. And it appears that the trend is continuing forward in each of those categories. Although I think it's going to get interesting in a few years when self-esteem, self-confidence, self-focus, self-reliance children start having more children who have to be somewhere. So let's take a look at each of these characteristics and see what they mean. Self-esteem. Self-esteem is feeling good about ourselves. Doesn't sound all bad, right? And it's not. It's not all bad to have self-esteem. The danger comes in with how does this relate to the other goals in life. Self-esteem, of course, those of you who are from the younger generation, anybody play a sport or do recitals and get a trophy because you participated? Anybody have their teacher tell them they did a good job even though they got the wrong answer? There's this incredible emphasis on making certain that we feel good about ourselves, because life will just be easier if we feel good about ourselves. Because they noticed in the 1970s and the early 1980s that a lot of kids didn't feel good about themselves. So then rather than asking why they didn't feel good about themselves, they said, well, let's do a lot of things to make sure that they feel good about themselves. Which, again, there's no inherent problem there, except when we make it more important to have self-esteem than to have other important characteristics, like virtues. If my son is failing his math class, and he feels bad about the fact that he's failing his math class, I don't want him to beat himself up, but I'm glad that he feels bad about the fact that he's failing his math class. I want him to feel better when he starts doing better in his math class. If my daughter is dishonest, and she feels bad, her conscience is ripping at her because she feels dishonest, because she lacks the virtue of honesty, I want her to feel bad about lacking the virtue of honesty. And I know a lot of you are nodding to me, but believe me, coming from this generation, I know the effects of it on my own life. I almost feel like I'm speaking heresy saying these things. I want my children to ever feel bad. Yes, I think I really do want them to feel bad about the things that are less important than self-esteem, or that are more important than self-esteem, like honesty and hard work. So self-esteem is fine as long as it doesn't replace those other things. And unfortunately, it's beginning to do that in a lot of places, I genuinely believe. Self-confidence, really, really, really believing in ourselves. And again, there's nothing wrong with self-confidence. I want a capable doctor to be my doctor who also has self-confidence. Don't want him to have to be second-guessing himself. But if I have to choose between a highly capable surgeon who struggles with depression versus an incapable surgeon who's really confident, I would rather have the depressed, qualified surgeon. So again, self-confidence is a good thing. Too much self-confidence becomes a dangerous thing. And our generation has an amazing amount of self-confidence. We've been taught not just that we are unique because we're here, and we're special because we have self-esteem, but we can do anything. And I want to tie this back to the last speaker. We can chase our dreams no matter how big they are, no matter how far away they are. We should trace our dreams and never let anything get in the way of them. And I was told this, and I believe it. And it's hard for me to struggle with the idea that maybe, just maybe, there are things more important than my dreams, like worthwhile goals. Maybe what I really need to do is walk the tight wire of finding where the balance is between good dreams and the work that I specifically am supposed to do to serve the world around me. And maybe that's not exactly the same as what I think will fulfill my dream, will make me really, really, really happy. So again, self-confidence is a good thing, except when we take it too far. There is such a thing as dreaming too much and chasing your dreams too much. Despite what all the movies and all the books and all the music tell us, we need to strive to find that balance. Self-focus. Anybody know what this is? That's Mona Lisa taking a selfie. A selfie, you use your cell phone to take a self-picture. And I don't think people can take a selfie without having that face. Although I hear the Pope has a pretty good selfie. Not that there's anything wrong with selfies, but there is something wrong with self-focus. And there's definitely something wrong with too much self-focus. And I want to be careful here. I want to give us a little bit of credit as the younger generation. We are not selfish. Some of us are, of course. Just like every generation is selfish. But to be self-focused is not the same as being selfish. There are a lot of young adults who are thrilled to sit down and work with homeless, or to work at a soup kitchen, or to donate their time to a worthy cause. The difference between someone who's self-focused doing that and someone who's not self-focused doing that is that we feel really good about ourselves while we're doing that. And I want to feel really good about myself when I'm doing that. Obviously, we're all in a journey. We're all being transformed by our experience, hopefully in a better way. So I'm not saying that we're all bad in this regard. But as the statistics again prove, it appears as though because of our high self-esteem and because family life centered around us and our activities and our trophies and our plaques, there's going to be this continued self-focus as we move into adulthood. You know, my parents were told that children should be seen and not heard. I wasn't told that. And I bet most of the other young people here today weren't told that, and certainly the next generation isn't being told that. So naturally, we're encouraged to have this increased level of focus on ourselves. And that leads to some dangerous issues. But there's one more caveat there. Just because I'm self-focused doesn't mean I can't appreciate the fact that you're self-focused too. We're very equitable about this. I look out for me, you look out for you, and that's how it works. We're less civically minded. Neighborhoods full of young adults typically have less interaction. You don't bring the neighbor pie when they first move into the house. You take care of yourself, and they take care of themselves. And this is where we get to our self-reliance. And some of this is certainly good. It doesn't mean that every member of the younger generations discourages welfare. Certainly that's not the case. And in fact, many of us are happy to take full utilization of the system. It does, however, mean we don't expect that other people are going to take care of us, and we don't expect to take care of other people. We are alienated. Many of us don't marry at all, and those who are marrying later and later every single year. We've become very suspicious of leadership. We have this major issue where one group of media sources is telling us one thing, and the other group of media sources is telling us the other thing, and we don't believe any of you. And admit it, regardless of where you've ever fallen on the spectrum, there are people across the spectrum who lie, deceive, and manipulate information to their own ends, and we've seen it, and we don't trust it. So we choose to be self-reliant. Great thing about Facebook is that we get to decide what media we listen to. We get to find sources of information for ourselves, and we don't have to listen to anybody else's. We're self-reliant. We're too self-reliant. We challenge authorities. We challenge leadership. I've heard of many teachers who have children challenge them, not just on, well, I think that I'm making a good point in this essay, but no, I think there's nothing wrong with my run-on sentence. We challenge everything because we have this incredible level of self-reliance. We're sure as heck not going to trust people to think for us. Again, this is good, and there's some good things about it, but there's also some dangers tied to it. And this has led to something that Michael Rose mentioned, and many others, I think Father also mentioned this, that as we continue to grow as a choice culture, a choice culture, and we get less inclined to the civic side and more inclined to the self-focused, self-reliance, self-confidence, self-esteem, you're becoming a familyless generation. We're isolated. We're alone out in the middle of space. And there are so many young adults who, and of course, there are many people across all generations, but there's so many young adults who are alone and lonely. I heard about this organization, cuddleparty.com. It's not dirty. I promise it sounds dirty, but it's not dirty. It's a group of people that get together. Cuddle pajama party? Whatever it is. They all get together and they get in their pajamas and they sit and watch a movie sitting close to each other. And there's moderators that make sure nothing inappropriate happens and whatnot. But the idea is they're alone. Who gets the least physical touch in their lives? Unmarried young adults. Children get touched. Wives and husbands get touched. Physical contact begins to fall away during this stage, as well as all the other psychological breakdowns. And if you live in a culture that is ever more self-reliant, self-focused, self-confident, and self-esteemed, then you're going to be ever more alone. And you're going to need more Brave New World entertainment, more drugs to take away the pain of your loneliness. So this is the reality of the culture that comes to exist in the chosen generation. This is what happens when Roe v. Wade is 40 years old, and we have the chosen generation is reaching 40s, beginning the apex of their career life, if you will. This level of separation. And again, pour that into the battles that we see in our midst. We see the polarization. We see the breakdown. We see the divorce rate. We see the destruction of our society. We see the isolation. What do we need? What do we need? And what message is going to get through to us? What are we going to be able to respond to? Well, another great body of research, statistical, sociological research, and this is fantastic research because it's been going on for, I think, 40 or 50 years. If you're not familiar with this, George Vallant is a Harvard study on adult development, doctor at Harvard, who has studied different generations throughout their entire development. So he took 3 separate case studies. One on recent Harvard graduates, I believe from the 1940s. Another one on inner city minorities that were not delinquents. They wanted to try to figure out what the difference was between inner city poor delinquents and inner city poor non-delinquents. So what's the missing pieces there? But as a result, they studied the lives of these 2 different groups of men in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s and their 50s and their 60s and their 70s. And for those who were still alive, their 80s and their 90s. And then they took a third study of women who were born in the 1910s and the 1920s. And they were originally studying how the effects of sexual, gender bias affected these women's career paths. But they continued to study these women in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s and their 50s and their 60s. And so now they started to ask a different question. Rather than considering the initial, we've got all this fantastic birth of data on how these people have lived every stage of their lives. What's the difference between those who have had really successful lives, and most importantly, successful conclusions to their lives, versus those who've had unsuccessful conclusions to their lives? What's the difference? Interesting question, right? Basically, what led to someone being not just high self-esteem, but genuine, deep happiness? What I would call joy. And the answer, I was thrilled to hear, because it's something that I already was very enthusiastic about, but I promise, I picked up the book not knowing the answer. The answer is deep, intimate relationships. And there's a little more to it. There's some certain key parts, but deep, intimate relationships led to these people having happiness. And those who failed to go through a process of growing and entering into deep relationships, usually a spousal relationship, but not necessarily, those who were able to do it went through a process of transformation. It didn't matter if they had lousy childhoods. It didn't matter if they struggled with addictions early on in life. It didn't matter if they were poor or rich. Across all those other variables, if they were able to develop deep, intimate relationships, then those deep, intimate relationships called them to virtue. And it called them to a process of transformation. And I can attest to the beginnings of this process. I've been married for just over 6 years, and I can tell you that the first year of marriage, as many of you know, was extremely difficult, because now I had someone who was perfectly happy to share with me in very vivid terms everything that was wrong with me. So we were either going to get a divorce, or we were both going to learn how to grapple with our shortcomings and learn how to be patient with each other through our shortcomings. And so it has begun us a long, slow process of choosing virtue out of an act of love. Choosing love of the other over ourselves. And this is a cure for self-focus, for self-reliance, for too much self-confidence and too much self-esteem. A process by which we are led not to seek just for ourselves, but to seek what is ultimately the best. And it's not just that we go somewhere and we bear the fruit and then we're done. No, we don't bear the fruit. We become the fruit. And so what I would propose to the pro-life movement of 2013, experiencing and attempting to interact with and dialogue with the culture of the chosen generation, is we need to become the people of intimate, loving virtue. We need to become the people of intimate, loving virtue. Now, obviously, we're there. We're part of the way there. We're making the journey, but we're not there yet. I know we're not there yet because we haven't won yet. So, as we make this journey, we're going to continue to grow in joy, because intimate virtue based in love is going to fill you not with self-esteem, not with an artificial kind of happiness, but a genuine joy. And so I put this contrast, if you will, between the self-esteem case and the joy case. Self-esteem is based on ourselves. I'm special. I'm good. Joy is based on virtue. I have oriented my life, and this is not the same as self-righteousness. We have to be very careful, because self-righteousness, very, very bad. Joy is the continued recognition of our weaknesses that moves us ever further on the path to authentic virtue. You ever see a pro-lifer with this big, beautiful, I'm happy I'm pro-life shirt, but they've got a big, ugly frown on their face? Yeah, I don't want anybody in my generation to ever have to see that. Our joy has to stem from the confidence, not in ourselves, but the confidence that we are doing everything in our power. We're continuing to examine ourselves and striving to understand what is good and right. Never assume that we've got it all down, but strive to always continue to guess and double check and work at it and get better and sharper at it, to understand what is good and right and to conform ourselves to it, to be made whole by it. Self-esteem has no impact on the rest of the world. The fact that I have self-esteem is not necessarily good for anyone else. The fact that I have joy, well, joy is contagious. Joy is a fount that grows inside you. I'm going to go ahead and take Jesus' parallel, take an image from Jesus. If you knew the one who was asking you for this drink of water, he would give you the waters, the living waters, and a fountain would grow up inside you to eternal life. Well, joy is just like that fountain. In fact, you could make a case that joy is that fountain that my faith teaches me Jesus put inside me. And as I base that joy on the path to virtue, and my effort to identify what is good and right and true, and my practice at it through my relationships, especially my most intimate relationships, well, I impact the rest of the world through each of my other relationships. And there's another, we'll get to that in a minute. Self-esteem, all are the same. There's this, anybody ever seen a movie? I guess you could call it a sci-fi movie, but it's really more of a children's movie. It's called The Incredibles. The Incredibles, there's this great scene in The Incredibles, the bad guy, the kind of a tragic character, but he doesn't have any superpowers. But he's made all kinds of special technological inventions that enable him to have superpowers. And so he's going to spend his whole life, have a brilliant, glorious career, using his inventions to be special and have superpowers. And then when he's done, he's going to sell all of his inventions to the rest of the world. So that way, everyone can be special. And when everyone's special, no one. That's a big lie. When everyone's special, no one will. Now, of course, we know that God does make every one of us special. God did make every one of us unique. But our uniqueness does not come, our specialness does not come from how other people feel about us or how we feel about ourselves. Our specialness comes solely from our abilities. Our specialness comes from the fact that we are loved. We are loved by a supreme truth. That is what makes us special. So our joy recognizes that we are all distinct, we are all different, we have all different abilities, and some of us will never have the abilities that another might have. But our worth, as Dr. Lee said, does not come from an external, does not come from what we can do or whether or not we can think. Our worth comes from our nature. Self-esteem, when it is challenged, and believe me, today is challenged. We were told that we could dream big dreams and be full of confidence. We were told that we were special, that we could take on the world. And today we're living in a world that has more expensive healthcare, more expensive housing, more expensive, you name it, pretty much everything, and a tougher job market. There are a lot of people really struggling. And so if you base all of your happiness on a sense of self-esteem, and it's being crashed, and you're losing your self-confidence, you're going to reasonably suffer from some depression. But when we are basing our lives on virtue, and our virtue is challenged, we recognize that we're not the person that we should be. We recognize that we're not doing what we should do. We don't fall into depression. We accept the challenge of transformation. It's a setback that leads us to become more, not a setback that causes us to go back inside ourselves and deal with depression until we can find our peace of mind. So we choose joy. This is what we have to be. These are the people, whether we're in the chosen generation, or in the past generation, or the generation ahead of that, those of you who are still here, we have to strive to be virtuous, to be joyful, and to be authentic. You guys have heard this before, the blood of martyrs is a seed of new Christians. And I genuinely believe that the blood of martyrs is a seed of new Christians because there's a spiritual grace that God pours out through the blood of Jesus Christ and the blood of his martyrs that enables the world to be transformed. I believe that that is a supernatural reality. But you don't even need to accept that supernatural reality to recognize the natural reality that when people saw St. Stephen, or when people saw the Roman martyrs, who had such joy, such virtue and authenticity, who were so courageous and at peace with the suffering that they willingly endured. Well, if somebody's suffering loneliness and the struggles of depression, and seeing that their self-reliance and their self-confidence has left them despairing and they're penniless, and you see somebody who's willing to face their death with joy and confidence and peace, that's going to inspire you. It's going to make you want to be more like that. It's going to make you want to figure out what that person is. So, I do believe that we need to work to overturn Roe v. Wade. I do believe that every one of the speakers today brought forth a valuable perspective, whether it was talking about the benefit of how to communicate to women, or whether it was how to build a very specific and logical case that explains the truth of the pro-life position and the falsity of the pro-choice position. All of that is good work, but it must be accompanied by an internal change that allows you and I to be mediums of the message that those who are self-reliant, self-focused, self-confident, and full of self-esteem will hear and understand. That those who are familyless or coming from broken marriages would be open to hear. The authenticity is the medium for the message. We will never get the opportunity to give that message unless they see us as authentic. John Paul II said, modern man listens more to witnesses than he does to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is only because they were first witnesses. So, I know that I am not yet the virtuous, joyful person that God has called me to be. But I believe that even the sociological research confirms the necessity of it. Lastly, I want to mention, this is very interesting, 2008 study, combined effort of Harvard and UC San Diego. They were studying happiness, general feelings of well-being, if you will, over thousands of different people. And they studied it over time. And they noticed that there seemed to be a correlation between the happiness of an individual and the happiness of their relationships, which doesn't surprise anyone, but also the happiness of the relationships. So even the people that we don't know, to the second, even to the third person removed, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, are affected by our happiness. Now, if our happiness is based on our self-esteem, then it's going to be transit, it's going to be up and down, it's going to be a mess, it's not going to be helping anyone. But if our happiness is based in the joy of virtue, then we're going to be a fount that is always pouring out into the relationships, drawing people to love, to joy, to sacrifice, to virtue, even to the relationships of the relationships, and maybe to the relationships of the relationships of the relationships. Now, I don't know if this study is 100% certifiable, if we can say that there's enough research done, but it sounds like a good thing to try, and if it's going to encourage us just that little bit more to be virtuous, to be joyful, to be loving and engaging, to smile with our pro-life shirts on, to love with our pro-life shirts on. Modern men will never again choose virtue out of fear or expectation of others. Modern man will only choose virtue because he's inspired. So let's be that inspiration. Thank you very much.